I'll like come
Decent amount
across
for
your
sure.
your Instagram stories here and there, and I'm just like, is this guy living in like a resort? Like you're like Miami is just like a vacation spot, right? And I can't imagine just like living there. I mean, it'd be great to live there, but yeah, just seeing the Instagram stories and photos you post, I'm like, is this guy just like constantly vacationing, or is this just like his life?
um, Andre's here.
Yeah.
Should we let him in? All right, let's do it.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Yo, what's up, man?
What's up, man?
Not a whole lot. Same
All
as
right, before
usual.
we jump into it, like, when do I get one of those hats?
They'll be available soon. This one's
Same,
actually
please.
like there's only one in existence. This one in particular,
Damn.
because
Okay.
I was wearing an
Damn. Okay.
Avalanche hat when I was traveling to Denver for like the conference, and was gonna meet up with a bunch of people. And my wife was like, "Why the fuck are you wearing that?"
Yeah.
And she got this made
True.
that day, and I gave it to her. She's like, "You should be wearing this."
That's awesome.
And then it's going to be like one of our first merch items soon. So
Yeah, man, it's great to finally have you on the pod. It's been a hectic, like, past 2 months for you. So, like, you recently got married. Um, you've been going to all these conferences. Crypto in general has been pretty crazy. How have you been managing all this? Because, like, yeah, I'm fascinated.
honestly, the answer is just having amazing co-founders.
Mm.
Like, yeah, it's one of those things where if like I can't imagine a world in which we would have gone this far and in which we would keep going if they weren't there as well. So I think the three of us kind of like whenever someone's got something going on, like whether it's work or outside related, everyone else just picks up the pieces and we keep the ship moving. So it's
Nice.
been pretty great.
Do things feel any different now that you're married, or is it really
Yeah,
just like a new label and you just continue living your life as is?
I thought it would just be a label, but it's kind of cool. Like you get married and it feels like you're restarting the relationship. So it's like you go through that
Mm,
entire first part, like the best part. You get to do it again, which is pretty cool. But
interesting. So it's like, yeah, the
That's
honeymoon
awesome.
phase starts back over.
that's right.
Then
Yeah,
you have, okay, cool.
which is weird, but because it's like someone you've known for years, and in most cases, like mine, like you're already living together. But it's I don't know, like everything, every conversation feels like a lot more permanent. Like everything else just feels a lot
Mm,
more integrated. Yeah, I don't know. It's cool.
cool. Well, you're making me jealous because I'm a single Pringle right now, and I know I know Connor's kind of you're locked down as well. So maybe invite me to the
Yeah,
wedding though, Connor. I
pumped.
want to be there in Miami on like a tropical beach.
You
Hell yeah.
you will be there. It'll be destination.
Seafood wedding.
Yeah. Well, so
Yeah, you know
we can
exactly.
one thing I wanted to discuss with you is a question to kind of kick this all off is obviously the open source AI space has been getting a lot of attention recently. However, it really seems to be mainly focused on like open sourcing the model weights. So like, Grok recently was open sourced, Llama 3 was just dropped, but there's no conversation or like plan to actually open source like the data sets that these models are being trained on. What do you think about that? Like, is that something that people are going to start talking about in the near future, or is this something that will probably never happen because the data is pretty much the moat with these models, and companies are never going to be willing to give that up? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts there.
I mean, I think there's going to be a lot more open sourcing of data as time goes on. I mean, especially with us in the mix, like we do plan on open sourcing all kinds of data. It is an interesting question though, because yeah, you're right. Data does tend to be the moat for any model, really, because like at the end of the day, um, those weights were derived from some data set. Without that data set, like they would just be random numbers. So yeah, and the thing, I think we're starting to see like an uptick in people talking about the importance of data and how how it really differentiates models. Llama 3 was released recently, and they completely ignored chinchilla scaling, which I thought was like super interesting because there's rules around when you increase your parameters, you have to proportionally increase the amount of tokens that go into the model. And these guys said, you know what? Yeah, we have more H100s than anyone else in the world, but what if we just add more tokens, like add more words, add more data to this model and just run it for longer and then increase the context window? Then all of a sudden you end up converging to an amazing model. I think it's like pretty telling actually that a company with so much compute would opt for that approach. It kind of tells you really how important it is to have not just tons of data, but the right kind of data going into your model. And I mean, yeah, like when the AI revolution just started, all the talk was around compute because that was, the big immediate bottleneck. Um, but the bottleneck that we're starting to realize is happening, and one that we've been talking about for a while among the grass community, is the data bottleneck, and that's one that isn't as simple to solve. It's more of a chronic issue than an acute one, which is just adds to why we think it's such an important problem to tackle.
For sure. And I think that's what's so cool about like both crypto and AI right now is like because they're kind of on the cutting edge of technology, there's a lot of like new approaches to things that are just taken kind of maybe on a whim or on like a an educated guess, just kind of like you mentioned. And I think that's where I want to be personally, like professionally, is in industries where there's just like lots of new stuff coming out every day and people are rethinking from the ground up, like from first principles, like how can we make things better um, in a variety of ways. But one other thing I wanted to touch on before we really jump in is um, I know initially you were maybe anonymous or pseudonymous on Twitter. I actually started out my crypto Twitter journey like that as well, and so I really have like um, the same experience of like having posted from an anonymous or pseudonymous account and then having doxed myself eventually. So I'm curious, like, I don't know, what was that journey like for you? You know, why did you dox? Do you miss being anonymous ever? Like, I know I do sometimes. So yeah, curious about
It's a
all
funny
that.
question. Myself, actually, my co-founders and I, we're all very private people. Like I don't think any of us really enjoy taking the spotlight and just kind of advertising who we are to the masses. And when I started my Twitter account for crypto, I didn't think I would ever end up reaching any sort of following. I kind of just made it so that I could see what's going on in the industry and occasionally share some thoughts within a really close circle. But when we started working on Grass, um, it didn't take us very long to realize like if we're going to build a mass consumer app, it's only fair to our users that they know who is mainly contributing to this product. And it would be very, very unfair if we just remained anonymous and asked them to trust us. And we're actually starting to see that trend among like the rest of crypto, not just in consumer crypto or like crypto AI. Like we're seeing a lot of DeFi founders coming out and saying, "Hey, this is who I am. Like I'm not afraid to show you that, and we're not hiding anything here." The funny thing is, actually, I think Connor, you invited me last November to a talk in Boston at MIT, and I think those pictures were the docs. Like that's what doxed me. So you were the one
Damn it,
that broke
Connor.
the
Oh
seal.
man,
He didn't even get to do it on his own
that's
terms. He
actually really
was
funny.
I guess actually he accepted speaking at that event. So
Yeah, it felt kind of funny too, I think, because in the event announcement, it was just like a profile picture and everyone else had their photos. And I remember sitting there thinking, okay, this is weird. It's time to stop. But
Yeah, no, that's really funny. I mean, yeah, I remember that actually. I wasn't even at the conference. It was like an invite on behalf of IoTex, but really appreciate you going there and speaking. I think that was kind of like the genesis of you doxing and like you guys all being more public about who was behind the project. And I think it is super helpful, especially as a founder, in terms of building community trust, contributor trust, investor trust, like all that stuff. So yeah, appreciate you taking us along with you on the journey.
thanks to
so
you.
all right, let's go ahead and kind of dive into what grass is, do a little level set. So I mean, you and I met, I think, over a year ago. And I remember when you were first discussing grass to me, you were describing it as this like decentralized residential proxy network where users could route internet traffic through other users' IP addresses. And some of the use cases that you guys were talking about back then were um, enabling clients to do like market research and other like jurisdictions or locations. Ad verification was one of the ideas, web scraping, and so on. But then it wasn't until about like 6 months ago that I think you guys really narrowed your focus and started specializing more in web scraping for AI. So could you kind of talk to like how that decision was made? I guess how did you guys kind of gain the conviction to just go fully down that path? Um, would love to kind of hear how that all played out.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, when we got started, actually, the biggest problem that we want to tackle, and it's one that we still want to tackle, and I think it's at the core of our mission, is the fact that there were thousands of companies, very large companies around the world, that were paying middleware providers to sneak software into free apps and VPNs and like screensavers and things like that, in order to route web requests through them so that they can get unbiased views of the internet so that they can remain competitive with their like, I guess, other industry incumbents. So like one example of that would have been in a huge e-commerce platform, that wanted to go and scrape every other huge e-commerce platform for their prices in real time, and then be able to compare their own prices and say, okay, we're overpricing this, or we're not, or like we're way too competitive on this other thing, stuff like that. Um, and there's like nothing innately wrong with wanting to scrape the web in this fashion. If anything, it's good. It's good for consumers at the end of the day because everyone's starting to become more competitive with one another. But the way in which they were doing it was, they were left with no choice but to use these middleware providers because there was no better solution on the market. And naturally, each of these large platforms wanted to block every other large platform from scraping them. So if they try to do it without one of these, without routing the web requests through thousands of geographies around the world and like millions of IP addresses that are residential that actually have like real residential views of the internet, they wouldn't be able to do so. And we thought that it was just, this is something that lots of people around the world would be more than happy to opt into and like more than happy to contribute to, but there's no real way to do it. And we started looking at this problem. We said, hey, like, how could we solve this? And within less than an hour, we said, okay, crypto is the only way to do it. We've got to do this as a crypto project. And then came all the brainstorming and around like how exactly was this going to work, and what's the bootstrapping mechanism for this type of project. But anyway, like fast forward a little while, we launched Grass, and within a few weeks of launching, we had ridiculous inbound requests from a lot of companies that said, "Hey, we want to tap into this type of network and start doing our own scraping." And for us, we thought, okay, this makes a lot of sense. We were expecting that because every company wanted to do the ethical thing and use something that's actually compensating users that are aware of what's going on. The one thing we found interesting was that the demand from these AI companies that were coming to us and saying, "Hey, we need to route traffic through residential bandwidth," um, their needs were exponentially higher than anyone else's, and were just growing at a ridiculous pace. Because you can imagine the amount of data it takes to create a training corpus for a base model is like, you're looking at like a galaxy versus a solar system, when you're comparing that to just occasionally scraping the price of something. And at that moment, we said, okay, this industry or like this market is growing at a pace that like I don't think anyone could have imagined a year earlier. And the one driver of that market growing is AI. And then, of course, so we said, okay, like we should tailor our products to big AI companies, and not just big AI companies, but also like smaller startups in the AI space, and other open source foundations in that category. And one common denominator that we found among all these players is that dealing with the data, like scraping it themselves, like these are not things they want to spend their time doing. They want to spend their time solving real problems, creating competitive models. And something like 70% of the time that goes into training a model is doing a lot of the boring data stuff. So we said, look, we can take all this off of their plate and integrate it all into one protocol. And that's what kind of drove the shift in our messaging and the shift in our, I guess, direction. But yeah, throughout that, like while we spoke to a lot of these AI companies, we started finding, okay, there are much bigger problems here than just people's resources being abused. Like that is a huge one. Don't get me wrong. But then there are other ones that have crazy downstream effects. Like, what if someone scrapes a data set and sells it to an AI company and tells them this data set came from these websites? The AI company has, if we're talking petabytes of data, like the AI company has no way of actually verifying whether it came from that website unless they go and rescrape it themselves, which would just defeat the purpose of paying for that. And we realized there's a huge incentive all of a sudden for people to poison these data sets. That you can introduce a tiny, tiny amount of bias. Like it doesn't take that many lines of data to be altered to introduce bias into a model. And then the knock-on effects of that bias can have huge, huge effects. Like if you have 100 million people that are using all kinds of models that were fine-tuned from one base model that was biased in a particular way that no one really noticed, you can all of a sudden change the trajectory of humanity, right? Because you can change, you can subconsciously change people's thoughts on an upcoming election, for example, because they're interfacing with an AI for most of their day-to-day tasks. And like that interfacing is only going to happen more and more. And we said, okay, there is a serious need to prove the origin of data, which led to some of our more like, infrastructure focus as well.
Yeah, don't let them
Sorry.
poison the well in terms of kind of like data sets and provenance of that data. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it sounds like basically the narrow and focus for you guys was like a response to the market, specifically like the demand side, about where you saw the most demand, like what segments of demand were growing most quickly. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, you can't serve that demand without growing the supply side a lot. So I want to talk about the supply side for a second. I mean, to me, as like someone that's been in Deepin for a couple of years now and seen like a lot of projects launch, you all's launch just, I think, kind of blew my mind in terms of the memes, the virality, how quickly the Twitter account grew, how quickly the download account grew. I think you all are most recently at like a little bit past 2 million unique users. That number might even be higher, but that's kind of like the last public number I saw in less than a year. And I know like the barrier to entry here is lower than for say like a Hive Mapper where you have to buy a dash cam and set it up and use it when you drive. Like the barrier to entry is lower here in terms of downloading a Chrome extension, or an app, and having it kind of run in the background. So obviously it's not like completely apples to apples with other deepins, but I think it's still super, super impressive. So yeah, I mean, what would you say contributed to that growth? Like, did it surprise you? The couple things I wrote down in terms of like why that might have happened were just like, yeah, ease of contribution. The referral program I think was huge, and then just community building and memes and good kind of social media comms. But maybe that covers all of it. But yeah, curious if you have anything kind of different
Yeah,
to
I
say on
mean,
all
I'd
that.
say that mostly covers it. We did spend a ton of time in the early days trying to make sure that every little detail of this protocol is something that's very easy to share with other people. Everything from the name Grass to the fact that the dashboard and the application just feel like Web2 products. And even starting out with a points system instead of launching the network on day one, we felt was incredibly important and crucial to actually growing it. Because if you launch a network on day one, you're not really giving the user base enough time to go and create their own contribution to it, to go and like bring others on board. And through the design of the referral mechanism, like we can ensure that if you join the network and help onboard a lot of other users and spread the word and like tell them, hey, this is very important. Like this is a way for the average person to go and get involved in the production of AI. We give them, like, we buy them some time to just go and spread that message and actually like be recognized for their contribution through the increase in the points that they receive from the referral mechanism. Beyond that too, like it's been amazing to watch the way our community grew. a lot of it just kind of happened organically, which I love. People
Yeah.
would join the Discord that had never heard of anything crypto related, and they were like, "Hey, like my friend just got me onto this. Like, what's this all about?" And then the way our community kind of self-educated and propagated the messaging and kind of made everyone feel like they were part of this movement together was amazing. So I've got to give a huge shout out to like um, basically our entire community actually, because without them, like grass wouldn't really be anything at all.
Yeah, like I got to give you guys props as well to just how simple it was to get involved and like participate. Because I remember early on just like having to sign up with an email, and then you guys were also really early to this whole point system trend. I think you guys were like one of the first to actually implement this before it blew up. And so, like that combined with the referral program, just kind of like really lit everything on fire. And I just remember like competing with my coworkers at Masari to see who could send the most or who could basically get the most referrals. And it just got really competitive, and it was almost just fun comparing like points as well. Like every day we would, or every few days we'd be like, all right, everybody drop your points. Like where are you guys at? So there was just like a game element to it as well, which was enjoyable.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when it was actually one of my co-founders, Gordy. You can find him on Twitter, 0x Gordy, who brought up points for the first time. And at the time, it was kind of this niche thing, and he loves just diving into niche DeFi protocols and like anything on chain, stuff like that, and seeing like what's popular. And I remember him bringing up to us, "Hey, I think we should do points." Um, and then we took like 2 minutes to look at it, and we said, "Oh my god, yeah, this makes so much sense for us." um, yeah, it was kind of a no-brainer, and I'm pretty. It's kind of nice to see like others in the industry kind of adopting the same thing, because there are a lot of very clear benefits to designing your early, like I guess, ways of recording contributions in that fashion.
So I know one of the slogans you guys are using is like democratizing AI and wanting to become like the data layer for AI. So I mean, before we really dive into like the type of projects that might be using this protocol or who you kind of envision using Grass later down the line, we'll talk about the infrastructure as well. So what exactly goes into like what is needed to actually build out that data layer for a decentralized or AI ecosystem? So if you could just kind of like for those who might not be too familiar, talk about like the requirement to do like data collecting, annotation, preparation, all that. So just what goes into like becoming a data layer essentially.
Definitely. So I guess the origin of the data pipeline is sending when we're talking about web data, right? Because that's kind of what we're all about right now. The origin of the data pipeline is hitting a web server, or like getting a machine, such as a computer or a phone, to send a request to a website and say, and just like kind of ping it, and then the website will return like all the contents on the website. And that's kind of your initial data, is just whatever the web server is sent back to the node. And that initial web data that you're receiving is actually really ugly. It's like a bunch of HTML. It's kind of unusable. Like even if you want to feed it directly into an AI model, it won't really be like a language that humans speak. So you need to go and strip away all those HTML elements. So then like enter the cleaning process and structuring, right? So you strip away all those elements, and sometimes you drop certain data that you don't want in there. There are many reasons for why you'd want to remove data. Some of it might be sensitive or whatever it is. Um, and then you can structure all that into something like a JSON file. And then you take that object and you put that in a repository. Um, Once you've done that, it's still not really in a state where a machine learning model can really understand it. You have to turn those words into tokens and then numbers. So like you tokenize your data set, that's what that's called, and then you embed it. So you run it against another model, which is going to turn every single word in that data set into basically huge vectors, so like huge strings of numbers, right? Or arrays of numbers, I should say. And after you have all those arrays of numbers, only then do you put it into a model to go and train it. Now, after you've done your initial run, you might want to go and tweak a few things. And sometimes you'll want to go and tweak that by creating a ton of synthetic data with the model that you just trained. So that you create a bunch of data with that model and you feed it back into the model and you try to get it to teach itself. Now, what people are finding is that a big part of that process needs a bit of help from humans.
Yeah.
And at the moment, there's probably like a tiny labor shortage when it comes to people that are going to go and annotate these things. But I think that's going to be resolved very quickly because it's such a low barrier to entry. And soon it's going to look almost like people completing surveys online for passive income. But at the moment, like there is still like a decent opportunity for people to go and kind of capture part of that space. And what that involves is people looking at that synthetic data and saying, okay, this prompt is good, this prompt is bad, and then feeding it back in. And you'll see if you use ChatGPT, like every once in a while it says, hey, rate this prompt. Is it good or bad? Like what you're doing is actually annotating it. Like another example actually that I love about data annotation is like CAPTCHA.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, like in the early days of CAPTCHA, what they were doing is they'd give you two things to solve, and like one of them was something they knew the answer to, and the other thing was actually something they didn't know the answer to.
Hmm.
Now, if a lot of people got the one that they knew was right, then they'd actually use them as a filter to say, okay, like they're not just clicking random things. So there's a higher trust score that we can associate with their answer for the one that we don't know the answer to. And then by doing that, they actually got many millions of people to go and start helping train the very first image detection, or I guess like the very first OCR algorithm. So like getting programs to understand human writing and translate it into like words in a Word document, for example. So that's pretty cool. Now back to like the data pipeline. Once you've gone and like done this a bunch of times, you've got a base model. So you've got this huge model that has like a kind of generalized capability that can do a lot of different things. Now, if you want to take that model and just make it specifically very good at one thing, you can go and fine tune it. So you go and repeat the process with another smaller data set, and it's a
Hmm.
very similar process. Now, when you're using the model, and this is something that a lot of people don't really think about, but it's very intuitive. And like the second you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Is you're sending the model data. Like when you're interacting with it, you're like what you're sending it, the prompt is actually data that's being used in that model. And if you like if you increase or decrease the size of like what they call the context window, or like the amount of words you can put into your prompt, it actually gives you like different amounts of like different levels of model performance. So that's something that's very important to optimize. Now, every once in a while, like, you'll go and interact with the model and give it some data. And then the way the model works is it'll take your prompt and try to find the next word over and over again. And then like to you as a human, that looks like an answer that's being generated by potentially another human, but it's really just a machine. Um, every once in a while, it actually doesn't have the context to answer the question that you have. Sometimes that could be because the model was trained on past data, so up until like last year, and it doesn't have any knowledge of recent events. So now what the model could do is go and scrape the web in real time. You can probably see like how we're fitting into like every stage of this.
Yeah.
They'll scrape the web in real time, add that to that prompt that you've sent it, and then guess words from there with that new knowledge. So at every single stage of like this data pipeline, you can also see every stage of the compute pipeline, and even like how the model is being used, how those two things are just kind of central to the entire thing. And as you know, and back to your original question, as this data layer of AI, we want to help facilitate and democratize every single stage of this process.
I love that, and how you kind of described a future where, this there could be this real-time scraping of the internet happening, and that data is just being ingested or, trained on by these models in real time as well. So you don't run into, like, when you're using ChatGPT or GPT-3, and it's like, oh, this is outside of when or this information has been created outside of like the data that I've been trained on. And so when you envision a future like that, it really just makes you feel like I would have never thought we like this would be happening this soon. So that's really interesting. But also when you talked about, leveraging humans when it came to labeling some of that data, one project I thought of was Hive Mapper, where they were essentially leveraging their community to train a essentially like an image recognition model, but to identify like street signs, different objects that you'd find on the road and so on. And so they sort of gamified it to where there's an interface that asks the user, identify all the stop signs in this image, and they would have to go through and do so, and they would earn points, which would translate into like rewards. But essentially, what they were doing is like it was RLHF, right? It was human feedback, which was training this model. And so, thinking about that in the aspect of data, what exactly like would the user be doing when it comes to like annotating data? Like, are they given like a prompt, and then yeah, what exactly are they doing?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it'll really depend on the data set that needs to be annotated. And in some cases, you need to evaluate how good the prompts are of a given model that was trained on a certain data set. So at that point, you're just evaluating, okay, did this model spit out the correct information? If not, write down the correct information.
Mm,
And then, you can that's useful to any LLM developer because then they can kind of extract the semantics of that correct information or like that correction and then help correct the model to make sure it's not spewing disinformation or something like that. Other ones, which I personally think are more fun, are things like annotating images. So like you can differentiate, or you can like circle a person's hand and say this has too many fingers or something
yeah,
like that. And then other times it could even be something as simple as just filtering the raw data. There are a lot of different things that do benefit pretty greatly from human feedback throughout that process. And it's actually something we originally didn't want to dive into too much, mainly because our view is that over a long enough time horizon, and what we've learned about AI is like a long enough time horizon usually isn't that long,
yeah,
no matter how long we think it is, right? That LLMs themselves will be able to do the vast majority of annotation, and like a small number of experts will be, responsible for doing the tiny percentage that is still necessary for humans to do, up until LLMs can do that as well. And it's something that we thought was, kind of an interesting thing. It solves an important problem, but we weren't too keen on it until we realized that a lot of even though our product is super passive and like you don't actually have to really be engaging with it in order to participate with it, people are being extremely active anyways. And we could tell that, hey, a lot of these people want to be able to do more things with grass. And for us, it's very easy. I shouldn't say easy, but it's a lot easier than any other network that's trying to do this from scratch. Like, given that we have now 2 million users, this is just something that we can add to our dashboard and have it as a feature. I don't think we'll ever call it like our core product or anything like
yeah.
that, but it's something that we just think is a very important and a very nice feature to have. So, yeah, that's where we're at.
No, no, I totally agree, and it allows people who are looking to contribute in a more active way to have that opportunity rather than just like running something passively. And so, like you said, if you have the users, then introducing this as a feature, then rather than having like a whole unique project dedicated to this, makes a lot more sense from my perspective.
Absolutely.
And so I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about the infrastructure. You guys had an announcement on this around maybe a month or two ago. I don't know, time's flying. But essentially, you guys talked about how, in order to actually become the data layer of AI and solve some of these, I guess you can call them data provenance issues, you guys decided to launch your own layer two sovereign data rollup on Solana. And so I'd love to hear you just kind of talk about why this layer two was needed, why you couldn't just do this on Solana, like some of the limitations there, like what kind of required you guys uh, to go down that path.
Yeah, definitely. So like one thing I touched on earlier was the data poisoning problem. And it happens at two levels, right? So like the website itself might choose to go and poison data and honeypot you depending on who you are. So if it sees an IP address from a certain country or an IP address of a certain level of quality, so like let's say it's a data center, maybe it'll purposely change its data. And then by doing that, it actually ends up poisoning your data set at the source. So you'll scrape it from that website and you won't find anything wrong because that's what the website's showing you. And then having Grass nodes do this solves this problem because every website just sees real residential traffic, um, which actually kind of, it does solve that very inherently. The other one that I mentioned earlier is someone retroactively poisoning a data set. And then that's like a slightly more complicated problem to solve. One thing we talked about as a team was how do we go and, during a scraping session, create a proof of the request, like a proof that this data was scraped from this website on this time and on this day, and it actually came from there. And it was immediately obvious that we'd have to store every part of that web session. So every single web request associated with that session on chain. Um, and we said we did some quick math based on some of the like scraping testing that we were doing. So like not even the real full blown like web index scraping that we plan on doing. And we said, oh my God, this would be hitting like 1 million transactions per second. And that would congest literally any blockchain that's currently in existence. And at that point, one of my co-founders, like there's three of us, and like Chris, our CTO, he came up with the brilliant idea of, hold on, like we could just build our own scaling solution on top of this, strip away, all the digital asset stuff from a blockchain that makes it slower, and validate nothing but the web requests. So then in that fashion, like you can kind of create this data ledger that stores all the hashes of the data that's being scraped and the associated web scraping actions, and then just bundle that into a Merkle tree and post the root on chain on Solana, along with some summary statistics like who contributed to this data set, like which node helped scrape it, things like that. And the second that idea came out, it was such a no-brainer because, I mean, you end up solving all those problems at once. Like you don't end up having blockchain congestion. The people that are going to be using this data don't end up having to pay for, the transaction costs of having certain levels of like digital asset security that have nothing to do with web scraping. And it completely lowers the barrier to entry for anyone that doesn't know anything about crypto to come and use something like this. So that was kind of the origin of it, and that's basically how it works.
So do you envision a future where like people are building applications on this layer two? For example, there could be a DAO or a specific application that's focused on scraping like medical data or a specific type of data, and you know maybe they're rewarding people for contributing that type of data. So I don't know. Have you guys thought about like certain applications that can kind of pop up on top?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the vision for Grass is to be this data layer, and anyone can come in and build whatever they want on top of it. So, like as a decentralized protocol, all the contributors can go and vote on, say, hey, our massive army of crawlers should focus on scraping these domains, and like they can pass votes on those types of things and make those kinds of decisions in a decentralized way, which is something that's actually quite powerful because I don't think there's a single like web scale crawl that's happening where like the average person actually gets to make a decision. Now, yeah, right now we do have I guess two applications that are building on top of Grass that are being incubated in house. One of them is focused on actually scraping financial data to help inform decisions for financial institutions. And then the other one is, I guess, like the one that's doing the most activity. And we're calling it Socrates, and it's scraping all kinds of web data that's actually not present in the common open source repositories. And once that's ready, it's going to be pretty amazing to watch that just get open sourced and be made widely available to LLM developers. But beyond that, like we're starting to see an interest from people who want to build on Grass in some like really cool ways. Like one of them that I love is focused on multimodal data, um, because there's a lot of like I don't think we've even scratched the surface yet with some of the image models and video models and like audio models that are being developed. And I think it's really exciting that Grass is going to be helping enable this, because at the end of the day, like there's a decent amount of quality text data that's available for developers right now, but all the other modalities are extremely scarce. Like it's very, very difficult to find a good repository for that. So yeah, super exciting.
So does all this data that gets committed to, you know, the grass chain, or, the data layer that you guys are building, does it essentially become like a public good where, anybody can access this data? Like
Uh,
how do you think about, yeah, who
within
can
yeah,
leverage this data and, kind of a monetization model there?
yeah, within a certain buffer, yes. Like data doesn't have a very long half life in terms of its value, really. Like data that appeared on the internet 1 hour ago is so much more valuable than data that existed on the internet for the last 5 years. So for us, it makes a lot of sense that Grass should be open sourcing a lot of the historical data. And if anyone wants to come and access like some of the more recent data, they'll need to go and pay transaction costs and gas to either scrape it themselves or just access it. So like they'd have to end up, paying gas on the Grass network in order to do that. Um, the one I touched on one earlier when you asked about like the data pipeline, and that's one that I'm personally super super excited about. Is the idea of having models route prompts through the Grass network, um, like at the inference layer. So when you ask your model, which is hosted on a big AWS server, hey, where can I go and find this? That big AWS server is going to go and search the internet and use some web index that it's either paying for or is just kind of part of it. And then it'll get that information for you and give it back. But a lot of the time, that information is going to be wrong because that data is being sourced from a data center. Now, if they prompted that, or if they routed that prompt through the Grass network, they could get this unbiased view, and like the amount of latency that you add by doing that is like completely negligible, which is yeah like, and I think the need for that type of solution, like I don't think we've really quite seen it as much, we haven't seen it like as big as it's going to be in the next few years. Like it would be really stupid to think that there's going to be any big company operating in the world in the next few years that's not going to be using LLM technology.
Yeah.
And most of these companies are either going to be building proprietary models, or they'll be like paying for licenses for something, or they'll be using something open source. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, they'll be prompting it in their own ways. And they'll be needing data that is traditionally like the hardest to get, because these are websites that they're scraping that are going to be blocking anything that tries to scrape them or honeypot them, and they'll be trying to trick each other's LLMs. So adding, Grass to that stack actually levels the playing field for everyone. Which, yeah,
Yeah.
I
So
personally can't wait for.
someone, for example, could build like an indexer on top of Grass too, to like speed up retrievability if somebody is trying to like search through like the data on the Grass network as well. So like that's a good idea for somebody who's looking for something to build on Grass right there. That's kind of a core building block that's needed for that ecosystem.
Totally agree. Please
Yeah.
reach out if you're someone that's doing that.
Yeah, request for project. Yeah, I mean, speaking about, I guess, data sets that exist on the internet or private data sets, even, um, I've kind of heard over the past couple of months, especially as like all of the bigger centralized AI players put their hats in the ring and really start spending a lot of time and resources on developing better and better models. Like I've heard, and I don't know if this is true, but that like models will kind of converge and the towards each other in terms of how efficient or accurate they can be, and the real kind of advantage for these AI players, I guess centralized and decentralized, will be in the data sets themselves. And I saw, a couple months ago, Reddit struck a deal with Google, I think for $60 million to basically provide real time Reddit data to Google. So this might be kind of a silly question, but I'm curious, like, Reddit's obviously a publicly accessible website. Like, how is that deal enforced? And then I'm curious, like, how Grass plays a part in this whole kind of sell our user generated content and data to a big centralized AI player. Like, how does
That
Grass fit
is
in
a
there?
great question. Yeah, so on the topic of um, big AI organizations going and paying for data, like you'll notice a very interesting trend where all the big AI organizations that are doing this, especially with public web data, happen to also own very popular and very powerful search engines. And the reason that they're actually able to win a lot of these deals, like you'll notice some of the prices might seem lower than they probably should, given the value of AI. The reason they're able to get these deals is because they can kind of compensate the platform with, hey, look, we'll sprinkle in some SEO priority. And for the platform, this makes a lot of sense because anything that they lose in not charging more for the data, they can gain in advertising revenue, for instance. So these large search engines, and there's two of them in particular, and they're creating this moat around being able to pay for publicly available data. Now, it's our view that this isn't necessarily fair to the people that are contributing to those platforms. Like it's great that the platform's getting a discount, or rather, like they're getting a boost in their engagement from like this SEO, and that they're able to go and like bring in this revenue for themselves. But that data at the end of the day wasn't created by the platform. The platform was just hosting it. It was created by millions of people around the world that are spending that are enjoying their time interacting with other people on that platform. And if that platform disappeared tomorrow, those people wouldn't stop contributing these things like this information to the internet. They would just find another platform. So we looked at this and we said, well, it shouldn't really be the platform that decides this. It should be the people. And what Grass is able to do is, in a sense, liberate that data. Like if you scrape the entirety of a publicly available website and create a huge repository, you can liberate it. And then anyone that's contributed to that data set can then go and claim their stake in it. And that's something that we plan on implementing. And that's something that's very important to us, is that the right people get rewarded for these things. And then, users don't have to worry about things like, well, I contributed data to this platform, but now they're signing exclusivity with one company when they could be monetizing my data 5, 10, 20 times. And the reason they got that exclusivity is for some SEO advantage that I personally don't care about. So that's something that we're working on and are very, very excited about.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of parallels to the decentralized social movement and kind of like liberating the social graph from social media platforms and then like a lens or something and making the I guess the protocol or like the product be catered towards the users who are generating the content that even kind of makes the site interesting to be on in the first place rather than the platforms having this kind of like lock in of your social graph and of your content and of the monetization of that content as well.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah, what's also interesting regarding Reddit is I don't know if you guys saw, but there's a project that recently was creating basically like a Reddit data DAO, and it was incentivizing people to I, I don't know the exact details, but because of data laws and regulations, a user can go to Reddit and request all their personal data to be sent. But it sounds like that just takes a snapshot of your data and you contribute that to the collective data pool in that DAO. Whereas, like with something like Grass, and going back to your point about real time data being what's really valuable in order for these companies and businesses to extract these real time actionable insights. Like while data DAOs are cool, I mean the the main value proposition in my opinion is just that real time aspect where like you can have these distributed nodes all over the world that are just keeping on top of like everything. So it's like if a user on Reddit just posted about, you know, him craving ice cream, all of a sudden, like these other companies are now blasting him with targeted ads related to like nearby ice cream shops. And so that's something that just gets me really excited about grass. Like I know we mentioned this earlier, but yeah, this idea of the internet being scraped in real time and that data being ingested into a model, which is training on that data, and your ability to just have this like, real time personal assistant that's almost just like a buddy of yours that's with you everywhere you go. So, um, really excited about that. Just to kind of wrap things up, one thing I've seen in the decentralized AI space is related to, or I guess it's just a lot of decentralized compute networks. Like most people have been working on solving compute because that was initially identified as like the core bottleneck within AI. It's starting to shift a little bit with more projects um, launching around, solving the data bottleneck. But when it comes to like decentralized web scraping, are there any other projects out there that are essentially competing with you guys?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right. I mean, that's really good.
I mean,
I guess yeah.
yeah, I think it's I mean, I'd love to see more. Like, it's such a huge space with so much room to build into and grow into. I'd love to see more projects tackling similar problems in the same category because, I think it makes a lot of sense for everyone to do whatever they can to help solve these problems or help solve some of these problems. Um, I definitely agree, though, in terms of mind share, that a lot of it has shifted recently from compute because, it is a lot of people were rightfully trying to solve it. It is a huge bottleneck, and who knows how long it can go on for. But then there's like this looming, okay, once you've solved that, like you got to start thinking about what's going into these models. And people have kind of gone from deferring that or thinking about that problem to like suddenly thinking, okay, it's probably time to start thinking about this.
Yeah, I think the fundamental kind of like idea behind Grass just makes so much sense. Like I tweeted this the other day, but I was talking with like a Web two tech founder friend who was who wanted to scrape the web for a couple different use cases, and I just immediately like told him about Grass, and he really doesn't know much about crypto at all, but he very quickly was like, "Oh, that's brilliant! Like, please send me please send me their Twitter," because the idea of just like having this kind of distributed group of people contributing towards this thing where a centralized like model doesn't work as well. Like I think you've said before about websites and blacklisting like data centers, for instance, because they know they're scraping. Like this is a way to get around that. And I think it just makes a lot of intuitive sense to have it be built out in like a decentralized, distributed way, similar to the like the gotcha moment for me with Hive Mapper, where it's like people are driving around every day, a lot of them have dash cams already because they're Uber drivers. Like, why are the street views of the world not being updated more regularly? Like, because Google is doing it in a centralized way. But yeah, Hive Mapper makes a lot of sense. You guys' business model makes a lot of sense, even to like a Web two kind of founder, which is cool. But yeah, I think we're almost at time here. Just want to jump into our lightning round real quick. I'll give you like a short sentence or like a phrase, and we just love your kind of like off the cuff answers of like what you think about that question or that topic or phrase. Sammy's got some at the
We
end, and
we
I'll
we
ask the
hid
first
these
like
from
four or
you,
five.
Andre. But yeah, don't feel pressured to don't feel pressured
Nothing
to have to
crazy.
give like a
Nothing crazy.
long thought out answer. It can be anywhere from one word to just a short statement.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So first one, I'm just curious, like if only centralized AI companies or players could win in terms of like developing AGI first or making a bunch of money or having the most impact on the world, like who would you bet on of the kind of existing players that a lot of people know of, or maybe even one that
I've
a
got to
lot of
give
people
two
don't?
answers here: Facebook or Apple. And Apple hasn't really shown their hand yet, but they own the personal data side of things and the personal assistant side. And I think they're just waiting for until the time is right. But in terms of just everything else, the amount of data, like the amount that they're contributing to the open source community, I think Facebook is winning a lot of allies as of late.
Mm.
And just the way that they're open
Mm-hmm.
sourcing their models and the way that they're encouraging community feedback is going to attract some of the top talent. Not to mention, they also have a big grapple on the personal data side, but yeah, it's got to be one of those.
That's a great fucking answer. I haven't heard anyone say Apple before. But even like their devices ranging from like the iPhones to the MacBooks are like they're being positioned as like these edge devices where these models can be run locally as well. So um, they've got the data, like you said, and the compute in the hands of almost every user.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the great AI wars of the 2020s. Next question is, what's the kind of craziest or coolest grass community member story that you've heard of? Like, does anyone have tattoos yet of the grass logo? Like, have you heard anything just absolutely
I've seen a
insane that you
few
want to highlight?
tattoos. Yeah, yeah.
Really?
No
Wow.
way.
I got me thinking. I gotta get one too. Um,
You got the hat. That's good enough.
we've got a guy in our community called Lazo. Let me get his handle so people can follow him. I don't think he does not have anywhere near as many followers as he deserves. But this guy created a movement called the Grass Army, and he actually went and using his own machinery and equipment built like he created a bunch of dog tags for prominent community members in within grass and started doing giveaways for folks with like where he'd give away a dog tag that he created and he and he would just like engrave their Twitter handle on it and ship it to them. So this guy, his handle is Z underscore man 61. Um, that I know it's not like a crazy story. There are some crazy stories, people installing grass in really weird places, like garage door openers. But among our community members, I feel like I'd be doing them a disservice by not shouting them out.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's super cool. Hopefully gets some follows from this. Yeah, next question is, when AGI?
It's definition dependent, and I am not qualified to answer that
Okay,
question.
how do you define it?
In terms of software, I guess some chatbot that you can interact with, or even something that you can speak to, and it'll solve anything you want digitally on the spot and chain models together to get that done. Um, and there are a lot of dependencies there that'll take, I can estimate how long it'll take to overcome each of those dependencies. But as they propagate, like, it's very hard to give a time scale. All I can say is based on what we've seen from AI so far, probably sooner than what the average person thinks.
Like within 5 years, potentially, maybe longer. Not sure.
Really putting you on the spot here.
Yeah,
Sure.
I'm curious. I mean, I don't know. You'd have a better idea than me, Andre. But yeah, no worries. That's interesting. I think it is like, yeah, context definition dependent, especially with all the kind of like text to video, like in different use cases that we've seen come out now. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of just different definitions there. What do you think about the? I mean, we talked about a bit about this at the beginning, but what do you think about the points movement in crypto?
I think it's a great abstraction. Of course, I think that, but I really do because it allows the early, the people that core team that's working on the product in the early days to go and tweak things without making any like super material mistakes. For example, if you create a point system that is you accidentally make it like super abusable, you can always like create a new epoch where you've like altered it and you've kind of minimized some of the damage that abuse could have caused. I do think, and this is probably just human nature, a lot of people started building some crazy derivatives on top of points. In many cases, I don't really agree with that, but people are just kind of, in general, people are free to do whatever they like. By derivatives on points, I mean things like abusing platforms, creating a lot of accounts, and then selling those points, and knowing that those points might get zeroed out, and then having people buy them anyways. I do feel like that type of behavior is kind of unethical. But you know, anywhere, like any network that you could possibly create that is incentivizing a lot of people to do something for a greater good or a common goal will always attract like that type of behavior as well. That being said, though, I do think it, like points in general are a pretty good step in the right direction for bootstrapping crypto networks.
Good answer. I'm gonna take over now. Let's do one answer for these questions, or one word for these questions. Um, deepen,
Fire,
bit tensor.
emissions.
You're holding
Actually, can we
one
redo that
asset.
one? I feel like that's controversial.
Okay, bit tensor,
We'll cut that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
bit tensor.
Kaggle,
You're holding one asset for the next 10 years. What is it? Doesn't have to be crypto.
my ledger,
Human data post AGI at a premium or discount?
discount.
Damn, okay. And then lastly, are governments going to come after these decentralized AI projects the same way they were trying to go after Bitcoin mining?
Depends on the government, but there'll definitely be a few.
Perfect. Well, appreciate it, man. I had a blast. Appreciate you coming on again. And
For sure.
where would you, where do you want to hand off? If you want to share like your Twitter, maybe your co-founder's Twitters as well, or where people can go to learn more about Grass.
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to do that. I guess you're gonna put them in the description of the video, or
Yeah, I get just anywhere you want people to go to, who, whether it's the
oh,
Discord or anywhere
yeah,
else.
definitely. So if you go to getgrass.io, which is our website, you can go and see the um, all the different social links. And then if you go to our Twitter and see who Grass is following, Grass happens to be following all the notable core contributors at the moment.
Makes sense. Yeah, Twitter is always the first place I go for crypto projects, and it has all the links, right? It's got the website, it's got blog posts, Discord link, and all that. So yeah, Andre, thank you so much for coming on. I know your schedule's been super crazy the past couple of months, but things are really exciting these days for Deepin, for Grass, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you and the project kind of from the get-go, and being a Grass contributor as well. Love seeing those points tick up. So thank you
Yeah,
so much
thank
for
you
coming
guys
on,
for the
man.
time. Really appreciate it. This was fun.